Hello for everyone and welcome to the webinar of the risk assessment and management in the context of urban wastewater treatment directive recast. I'm very glad of your participation that showed the interest and concern that these matters have for most of all member states. We have here some rules that it's important for the meeting. And now we can begin with our program. And I will show our program, just a minute.
Maria Fernanda, a casta já está, quando quiserem.
Sim, posso dar tempo só para entrar as pessoas, porque estão pessoas a entrar na sala.
Okay.
Hello for everyone and welcome to the webinar of the risk assessment and management in the context of urban wastewater treatment directive recast. I'm very glad of your participation that showed the interest and concern that these matters have for most of all member states. We have here some rules that it's important for the meeting. And now we can begin with our program. And I will show our program, just a minute. So here are our program. Let's begin, and we are starting with Numa that has been working on environment and sustainable development for over 20 years in Europe and in the United States. Since 2012, he's been serving as CEO of Portuguese Environment Agency. He holds a law degree from Lisbon University Law School, a postgraduate degree from the Washington College of Law American University, as well as the Advanced Management Program from Kellogg Business School and Catholic Business School. So, Numa Casa, please take the floor. You're not listening, you are muting.
Okay.
Okay.
Hello, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
I see from the nodding. Thanks very much for that introduction, Fernanda. I almost forgot that time goes by really quick. First and foremost, I'm really happy to see that so many people have joined into our proposal to discuss these important issues. For all of us working on environmental policy, it is very important indeed to ensure that the Water Framework Directive, which is really our water management Bible, if you think of it in European policy, is a directive which is implemented over time. And we know that we've done so much over the last couple of decades, but we also know that we need to do much more. I would also remind everyone that the Water Framework Directive is a relatively recent regulatory instrument, because if you think of the beginnings of environmental policy in the EU, and that's a long time ago, indeed it was focused on water quality. It was focused on ensuring human health, really, in relation to water supply and sanitation, say. So with that, I think we would like to foster a discussion within the context, of course, of the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive's discussions in the EU. We'd like to foster a discussion around it being the instrument that it needs to be for the next few years, and in pursuance, of course, of the Water Framework Directive's goals. So in that context, I would like to start by saying that we are really happy to see that this directive, the Urban Wastewater Directive, is being revised after, I guess, 30 years of implementation, which was by and large a successful implementation regulatory instrument. We now reach a point where, for the next stage, we need to ensure that the pathways for reaching water quality standards and really good water status in Europe are important to be mapped out correctly. So for instance, we need to ensure that we need to have simple and easily verifiable procedures to ensure water quality, to verify water quality. It's also important that we realize that in a context of finite resources, of course, that we spend our money wisely. This is oftentimes by and large public monies. And in this context, of course, we need to ensure and we need to track that to environmental objectives and public health objectives underlying, of course, all these propositions. The Urban Wastewater Directive proposal also includes a very important principle, which is to identify risks of water discharges in wastewater, urban wastewater streams that may represent, of course, to environment and public health. However, as we all know, the application of this concept isn't cross-cutting to all the different population groups covered by the directive. So there is, of course, here an issue of trying to get a sense of how do you apply that, I guess, in a nutshell, to make sure that you would reach your objectives, but clearly one size doesn't fit all. So, for instance, if you look at the application of tertiary and even quaternary treatment methods taking into account that a certain charge has per se sufficient conditions to demonstrate the occurrence of risk, could result in some cases in low benefits, really, or even negative for the environment, in that it doesn't really integrate, all other things being equal, the assessment of potential synergies between the administrative decision based on charge and the differences between the multiple water masses and that will be receiving these charges. So what we try to foster within the policy context, really, and the expert context, actually, is to have a reflection on the pros and cons, really, of some of the specificities of the proposed directive on the table. We're, for instance, very keen on ensuring and talking to colleagues around Europe to see how they're seeing this application going forward, especially trying to see whether people are also thinking of tools such as multi-criteria analysis that might be useful for the definition of the treatment level that would be most appropriate for specific morphological conditions. And in a way, to a certain extent, I would argue, we're thinking along the lines of the recent water reutilization regulation, which indeed did just that, sort of bringing together risk assessment with multi-criteria analysis. To conclude very quickly, we just want to foster discussion to ensure that indeed going forward, we have a directive which again allows us to meeting our water framework directive objectives, which are high standard anyway, compared to just about anybody else around the world, but ensuring, of course, that we have the best way to achieving those objectives, given the different characteristics of the different member states and the way they're located, water masses, etc. So I'm really happy, as I said before, that so much turnout is gathered for this discussion, and I hope it's a fruitful one indeed. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Marcasta. Now, in our program, we all start with our moderation with José Saldanha Matos, a professor at School of Engineering of the University of Lisbon since 2008, sharing the hydraulics, environment, and water resource area. Member since 2009 of the Scientific Committee of PhD on Environmental Engineering and of the PhD on Climate Change and Sustainable Development Policies. Supervisor of more than 25 PhD, being member of more than 40 PhD assessment committees in Portugal, United Kingdom, Netherlands, and Denmark. Fellow of the International Water Association since 2010, member of the Council and of the European Policy Committee of the European Water Association, president of the European Water Association between 2017 and 2019, president of the Portuguese Water Partnership since 2020. So, Saldanha Matos, please take the floor.
Okay, thank you very much. At first, I would like to congratulate the organizers of this initiative, the CEO of the Portuguese Environmental Agency, Dr. Numa, Felizmina Quadrado, Anabela, and all the team of the Portuguese Environmental Agency in Portugal. This initiative I consider especially relevant, opportune, and timely, and I'm honored to accept the invitation to moderate it. I'm welcoming the participants. More than 100 people have registered in this workshop, coming from all Europe, and taking in advance to the authors of the PowerPoint presentations. We'll have a program for the next 2 hours with 3 main presentations, each one of approximately 15 minutes, from Geneva, Farabaigoli, from the Italian National Institute for Environmental Protection and Research, from Nathan Obermeier, from the German Environmental Agency, and from Anabela Rebelo, colleague from the Portugal Environmental Agency. All the discussions, the questions, the comments will be concentrated at the final of part of the event after the three presentations. But before the discussion, to be open for questions and answers, I will give the floor to Nel Frederic Rosenstock from the European Commission for a short intervention about sharing the Commission's point of view and how the risk-based approach have been taken up in the proposal. And finally, to Telma Branco from the permanent representation of Portugal in the European Union, also for a few words. And of course, at the end, you will finish with some main conclusions and closing. The proposal of this new urban wastewater directive extremely rich with a lot of relevant aspects for potential interesting discussions related with overflows control, energy neutral balance, social responsibility, and so on and so on and so on. This workshop focuses on a special aspect, risk assessment and management, but with the potential significant impact on wastewater treatment requirements, namely tertiary and quaternary wastewater treatment, affecting, of course, most of the European water bodies. So it's really, I hope, a very interesting, productive workshop with this, of course, three very well presentations and with a good discussion at the end. I will start the presentations, giving the word to Geneva. Geneva Farabaigoli has a PhD in sanitary engineering. She's an environmental engineer with 20 years of experience in wastewater treatment developed in collaboration with leading European and Italian research institutes. Is head of unit on installations in the carbon sector at the National Institute of Environmental Protection and Research, ISPRA, project manager of IMPEL, Italian National Institute for Environmental Protection and Research, project Wastewater in Natural Environment. And the title of this first presentation of the workshop is precisely that, IMPEL project, Wastewater in Natural Environment. Please, Geneva, have the word for the next 15 minutes.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. I try to share my screen. Just a moment. Let me know if you can see it.
Yes, yes, very well.
I'll try with the full screen mode. Now it's full screen. Okay.
Yeah, yes, it is.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So thank you for the nice introduction. Yeah, the name of the project is WINE project. Despite the name, it's not WINE, but it's an acronym of wastewater in natural environment. And in this presentation, I would like to explain you a little bit about this project developed in the IMPEL, is a European Union network for the implementation and enforcement of environmental law. And we developed this sort of index of circularity during this project. So let's start from the beginning. We started this project with another name that was the Integrated Water Approach, IWA, during year 2017. Yeah. We try to focus about the use of water, reuse at all industrial and urban cycle, and we try to understand the principle of circular economy in the water use cycle. So we started with some normal questions that everybody was doing. So what about water use efficiency? We discovered that a lot of cases we look only at the quantitative aspects of the water use efficiency. So there is a simplistic approach to promote water use, and in a lot of cases we noticed that it was without linking the water use to the impact over the water bodies. So many cases we observed that some installations comply the ID, the Industrial Emission Directive, but without linking to the WFD Water Framework Directive goals. So if we consider this slide here, you can see the normal procedure to reduce the freshwater consumption. So the use of less water for producing material, the reduction of CO2 emissions, and this has impacts in the water resources. So you can reduce the water bodies exploitation or promote the water resource replenishment, but has also consequences. And these consequences, in most cases, we observe the concentration of pollutants in the wastewater because of reuse, recycling inside the cycle. And that this can promote also short and long negative impacts on the water bodies. And so the effect on the water resources could be a reduction of natural values, increase of CO2 emissions, and can compromise the water status. So we try to understand this principle of circular economy, and we try to focus about this water circularity with another approach, not a classic approach that was focused on water use efficiency, and namely the quantitative aspects, only through the reduction of consumption and losses, the rainwater recovery, for example, or the use of sludge from the wastewater treatment plants as a source of organic matter and nutrients and for energy production. But we try to observe and try to have another different approach, a new approach, an integrated approach to achieve a real transition, because the both factors cannot be seen as individual indicators, but they should be linked with the several possible processes. So water has to be seen as a service, source of energy, and a carrier. So what we have done, we try to develop this index that can measure the efforts of an installation of a process to move towards the circularity. And how to develop this index was the first question. So in a way that could be a smart way, smart criteria. So we try to consider the key factors, some easy, accessible, and measurable factors that can take into account the relationship between the water use patterns, process, and environment. So smart criteria is S for specific, M for measurable, A for achievable, R for relevant, and T for time bound. So especially we try to develop this index in order to be easy, measurable, and consistent with data that are available, of course, and closely connected with the inputs, output, and outcome, and especially with a specific time frame. And we use, for example, the validity of an environmental permit or discharge permit. So what was our idea? First of all, we decided to change the name from IWA because it was a little bit confusing with the International Water Association, and we moved to WINE, so with water in natural environment, as a lot more appeal name. And in 2019-20, we developed this circularity index to endorse the transition to the circular economy. So first of all, we decided which key factors had to use. And here you can see all the key factors are the 11 key factors that we consider to develop this index. And they are in blue color because these are considered of high importance key factors. In a green color is the medium importance key factors, and in red, brown color, the last two that are the low importance key factor. So for each key factor, we consider a level of importance. And here you can see in this circle, here you can see the water circularity and all these key factors where can be considered and used. So for example, the first one, the freshwater consumption, or the third one, water use, or the sixth or the seventh, biodiversity. Here you can see in each part of this cycle that can start wherever, from wastewater treatment to water reuse for the water treatment according to the urban use, agriculture, industry use, wastewater, and so on. So for developing this index, and here you can see the algorithm for the index, the weighting factor and the normalization factor that we used according to a scale of importance. And we developed a simple, very simple Excel tool that here you can see on the right side, very simple Excel tool where according to the factor, key factor and sub-key factors, and according to the level of importance and the weighting factor and normalization factor, at the end, on the below, you can see there is a legend there can explain you which kind of circularity index you have obtained for different installations. So if you obtain there is a scale of color, very simple to understand. So if you obtain a negative circularity, you have got a red color index, so negative inputs for the circular economy. Yeah, you have to improve, of course. So if you have, for example, the orange color, you have low circularity, and green, medium, and blue, high circularity. So this for IC, the circularity index below 0, from 0 to 0.85, from 0.85 to 1.5, and then high circularity for above 1.5. So, which are these key factors? You have already seen the key factors, but also we decide to consider the sub-key factors and their impacts that can be positive or negative impacts. So for each key factor, there is a value that was 9 for the high importance key factor, 5 for medium, and 1 for low importance key factor. And for each sub-key factors, here you can see the different values that could be positive or negative according to the impacts. For example, just only to see one of them, freshwater consumption. If you have in place the measures to reduce consumption, but without linking the impacts on the quality of wastewater or contributed directly to its degradation, so the impacts should be negative. But if you have measures to reduce consumption with the possibility to reduce the effects of the effluent concentration, so the positive, you have a positive impact. And so here we consider for ID or not ID installation, all these key factors. So here you can see also the other key factors, microplastics, biodiversity, recovery of nutrients, but also sludge and voluntary incentive instruments, such as Ecolabel, for example, certification. So we have got a lot of real cases in which we can perform a test of this application of this circularity index. We started with the previous two. Here you can see the pulp mill that was used as a real case test before a permit review that was with some fixed emission limit values that were not considered according to the quality of the discharge point. So in this case, you have got a low circularity index. And then we tested after a permit review that was decided after a huge event. With this permit review, there was a different approach of the emission limit values according to the quality of the discharge point. And in this case, we apply again the circularity index. And after the permit review, for example, we have got green, so medium circularity index. But not only for the pulp mill, of course, we use the circularity index also for non-ID installation, for pulp and paper, of course, but also refinery processes, so biorefinery, oil, classic refinery, here you can see blue and red color, but also fertilizer production plant or brewery, and so on. So we have got a lot of results, from this application of the circularity index, and especially if you see the water circularity index and the urban wastewater treatment plant, we can, applying this index, we can understand some important interlinks, such as the compliance of the emission limit values defined according to the Water Framework Directive principles. That is very important and not just simple fixed, some simple flat values defined on current legislation. That is also the case in Italy, unfortunately. Also the importance of the removal of nutrients to prevent the negative effects on water bodies, of course, and promotion of water reuse and its relationship with impacts on concentration of discharge. And we, according to the, considering the wastewater treatment plant, the urban wastewater treatment plant, we also try to see the effect or not of considering the removal of microplastics and the compounds of emergent concern. And we noticed that the circularity index didn't change a lot, so just a little bit lower, but not so much. So in this way, we could assess the main important, the positive and the negative key factors, the positive and negative impacts of the application of the circularity index. So we noticed that if you have the emission limit value compliance according to the Water Framework Directive, of course, you have a positive impact. If you have a promotion of water use with positive impacts on biodiversity, is a positive, but if you have a promotion of water use with negative impacts on final concentration due to, for example, also concentration of the discharge, you have a negative impact. So in this way, we move during this project, during the last phase, try to apply this circularity index to different kind of facilities. So moving from the production to the product, from the installations to some regional local activities. So we try to focus to three different kind of activities. Critical activity as one, as mentioned you before, so for example, a refinery or a pulp and paper mill and so on. But also we try to focus to some regional local activities that could have significant impact in terms of water use. For example, a seasonal activity with high discharge loads and a high water consumption. And also the third one was a food production activity that use or intended to use, for example, treated wastewater for irrigation or sludge. So the main goal of this project was to improve the circularity, water circularity index and its application, to identify and link the best practice in terms of water use, water quality management, sludge management, water resources, and try also a little bit about energy balance, but we have to improve a little bit on this aspect. So this project is an ongoing project from 2022 to 2024, and there are 3 site visits and a final conference. So we already did 2 site visits, and we are planning the 3rd one at the end of the year and the final conference next year. The first 2 site visits, we performed this in a regional local activity in Madeira, so in Portugal, where we focus about a local activity with significant impact in terms of water use. But that is also very important for local communities' economy, because there was the sugarcane production for the rum production. So the production of sugarcane is very important, as it has contributed to the economical, social and cultural development of Madeira Island, but has got some problem, such as the waste, the water produced, such as bagasse and binasse. But they can be reused, bagasse can be used as a substrate for mushroom production, for example, and binasse, after specific treatment, because has a high pH and organic load, prior discharge into water bodies, can be used also as a fertilizer for banana crop production. So we try to use this circularity water index to find the solutions that can promote high transition to circular model, and to identify some synergies, and try to help the industry understand the importance of environmental compliance for the sustainability of their products. And the second site visit, we did it in Murcia in Spain, and it was a wastewater use of urban wastewater for crop irrigation. It was a reclaimed plant, so it was treated with a reverse osmosis membrane, as you can see on this right side, disinfection and so on. So the option to use fresh water or reclaimed water depends, of course, on the location of the place, the farmers, the type of crops, and the quality of water itself from diverse sources. So during this exercise, during this study visit, we try to focus on which are the most important questions that you can arise. So, are used the appropriate water, efficient water use measures? Are being used rainwater, for example, from greenhouses, roofs, or is the water used by the farmers affecting other uses? Can be possible. So the final remarks of this wine project is that the index allows to the assessment of the impact of the integrated approach to water use, and it confirms the promotion of the water circularity that depends on the management option chosen. So the application to the ID or not ID installation and the water reuse solutions enables the cumulative impact of efficient water use to be assessed both in terms of quality and quantity. So this index can, or should be, refined to include some energy aspects and further integrate impacts on CO2 emissions. So this is the aspects that we have to focus a little bit more. But the definition of factors applicable at the final product level could support the adoption of the best practice in water use, with relevance to also regional and seasonal products, as we have seen before in the case of Madeira. And so this can be considered an indicator that promotes integrated compliance with environmental legislation. For more information about this project, you can see here the link at the IMPAL website, where you can download all the reports available. Is available in English, in Italian, and also in Portuguese. So this was our last question. Can this index become a label? We don't know. Let's see. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you very much, Geneva, by your interesting presentation.
I hope I am in time. It's 15 minutes.
More or less.
Okay.
I'm relatively flexible in this type of workshops, but thank you for your efforts.
Thank you.
And for sharing your insights through this water circularity index. Thank you very much. I will pass the floor to the second speaker immediately, because the questions will be at the end, as I told you. Nathan Obermeier. Nathan Obermeier is working in the German Environmental Agency in the unit of wastewater technology research and wastewater disposal. He's an environmental engineer by profession, and he represents the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive Working Group of the German Environmental Agency. Please, Nathan, have the word.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much.
I'm just
Please.
going to share my screen.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much.
No, let's go. Okay. Thank you very much for the brief introduction. My name is Nathan. I'm working for the German Environment Agency, and I'm going to talk about how to remove micropollutants efficiently, because we already heard it in the introduction that the value for money aspect is quite important, especially also if we want others to pay for it, like in our case, the industry. And despite the title that I'm going to present a selection of options on the member state level, I'm going to give I'd say food for thought on how to do it and the different aspects that you could take and look at. So first off, I want to start with a slide and state our basic goal, which is to reduce the micropollutants in water bodies. That's what the quaternary treatment step is for, and that's what we want to achieve. And now the key question is how to achieve it. And we have actually several problems along the way. The first one is that we actually have little information on micropollutant loads from wastewater treatment plants on the member state level. There's detailed information on the wastewater treatment plants, but it is not a mandatory reporting. So we use the capacity or the people equivalent connected to the plant as an approximation. So actually it's quite hard to reduce micropollutants if we have little information. The second problem is that we also do have little information on long-term effects, both on how the micropollutant loads in rivers are deteriorating the ecosystems there, and second, on how improvements in micropollutant reduction is actually leading to better waters, better water qualities, because that takes years to take place. I mean, there are immediate effects, but we need long-term studies to see that. There is also little information on effects that come by multiple substances. So we know for more information about single substances, we have the PNEX, we have the environmental quality standards, but it is really hard to define the effects that multiple substances have. And it's even harder to define the effects of multiple substances and other stresses that occur at the same time, like, for example, heat. And it's also quite hard to predict the future, as always, with respect to climate change, how that develops. I mean, we see heat waves after heat waves through Europe, and that certainly has effects on our rivers. And we have also other correlating effects, like people are getting older and older people take more medicine since we have more pharmaceuticals in the waters. So those are all aspects that we have to take into consideration when we think about which wastewater treatment plants to equip with a quaternary treatment. And the task is basically the efficient selection of wastewater treatment plants. And to do that, I want to give a short overview on how the German situation actually is, because I think it's quite important that we, as different member states, get in touch with each other, that we discuss the issues to see how other member states, how their wastewater treatment runs. And in Germany, we have 5 categories of wastewater treatment plants with different size classes. The first one is until 1,000 people equivalent. The second one between 1,000 and 5,000. the third one between 5,000 and 10,000, fourth one 10,000, 100,000, and the fifth one, the biggest one, is everything above 100,000 PE.
I'm sorry, Nathan. You are seeing, you still seeing the first, the one of the first slides.
Okay, so basically, let me. So
and put in.
So what are you seeing now? Are you now seeing
the second one? The second one.
And you haven't seen that one, right?
Now, yes. Now
so
you are seeing.
If I do it like this, do you see it?
Yes, I'm seeing the. Now you are seeing the wastewater treatment in Germany, share of wastewater load.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm just going to continue like that. I mean, maybe there's a little delay between the slides.
Okay, problem.
Okay, so based on this slide, it's obvious that size classes 4 and 5 treat a majority of the German wastewater, which is almost 90%. So everything above 10,000 people equivalent in Germany, every wastewater treatment plant is in some treating 90% of the wastewater. If you look of the number of plants in that size class, do you see the new slide now or still the old one?
It's the old one still.
Yeah,
Okay.
can you put in slideshow? Maybe it's better.
Yes, it's
Not
better.
in
I'm just gonna share. I'm just gonna share my whole screen. I think that usually solves the issue. Okay, if I switch now, do you see it?
Yes. Now it's
okay.
It's good.
So,
okay, now it's good.
Yeah, we got that sorted out. So if you now look at the number of plants in the different size classes, you basically see that there are many small plants. Like, I mean, in the first 2 size classes, it's almost 6,000. Then the third one, which is quite small, is 1,000. And the biggest one has 236. And the fourth one, which is between 10,000 and 100,000 PE, has 1,910, which is also the critical number with regard to the recast of the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive, because it's stated there that everything above 100,000 is mandatory, and between 10,000 and 100,000 is based on a risk-based approach. If you take that size class again and break it down, it's also obvious that we have a lot of plants in the size range between 10,000 and 20,000, and it become fewer and fewer the bigger the plants get, up to 15 plants between 90,000 and 100,000. And I think it's quite important to realize that if you get the big plants, you have a lot less work dealing with the small plants, because naturally the big plants have big impact, and the small plants most of the time also treat a smaller volume of water and therefore have a significantly smaller impact. That again, on the big scale, you always have to look into the details, but that's the big picture. If you now come back to the question, which wastewater treatment plants do we focus on? We, the German Environment Agency, published a position paper in 2015 where we stated it would be good to equip all wastewater treatment plants with more than 100,000 PE with a quaternary treatment, and a quaternary treatment for wastewater treatment plants that discharge into sensitive water bodies. In our definition, sensitive water bodies were water bodies that are also used for different purposes, like bathing water, drinking water, irrigation, and so on and so on. So that was our proposition in 2015. In 2016, in Germany, there was the start of the so-called trace substance dialogue, which is basically a synonym to micropollutants in Germany. And they developed a guideline in 2019 on how to identify the most relevant plants that should be equipped with a quaternary treatment. And we now have the National Water Strategy, which is a strategy basically of the government in Germany that has the continuation of this trace substance dialogue and the equipment of wastewater treatment plants, of additional wastewater treatment plants with a quaternary treatment as one of its measures. It should be added that in Germany, we already have around 40 to 50 plants that are equipped with a quaternary treatment. So we are already heading into that direction. The proposal of the European Commission stated that we need quaternary treatment for all plants over 100,000 PE and a risk-based assessment for the plants between 10,000 and 100,000 PE. So just to give you a quick look on the guideline, because I think that's quite important to realize on how we select plants and how that approach looks. We also had that introduction that we need a multi-criteria analysis. We have that risk aspect. So I thought it would be a good idea just to show it quickly how it looks. It's unfortunately in German, but I think if you have any detailed questions, we can try to give you a more detailed translation. But I basically translated the key points on how to assess which plants to equip with a quaternary treatment. This all starts with the scope, where you define basically the water body that you want to select, and you set goals for the water body that also rely on the water body's use. For example, we have one goal for the River Rhine, which is the reduction of micropollutants in the River Rhine by 30% until 2040. That's the goal that was set for this river. Next, you assess the pollution stress and the vulnerability. It's basically doable in various ways. You can either directly measure the pollution stress, or you can indirectly model it, or you can do basically a combination of both, where you verify your models with the measurements you take. And if you look at vulnerability, you have ecology, you have drinking water abstraction, bathing water, irrigation, the ones I've mentioned before as well. The next step, you then prioritize measures, or that's how we do it, where we have scenarios, we have cost-benefit analyses, we check what kind of pollution we have, if it's a diffuse source, if it's a point source, if measures on wastewater treatment plants are helpful or not. And if those measures are identified as priorities, you still have to select wastewater treatment plants in that area, because what you're doing is you're looking at the water body, and you have different discharges and so on and so on. And the selection process of those wastewater treatment plants is again based on effectiveness, that looks at how much water is discharged by that plant with what kind of micropollutants, on efficiency, how efficient would be the removal at that point. Synergies with other goals. I'm going to show one with the Environmental Quality Standard Directive, especially diclofenac on the next slide. And if the wastewater treatment plant was freshly built, which is in Germany almost never the case, or if it has to be retrofitted or upgraded anyway. And lastly, then you come to the point of the implementation, where you basically select the treatment option. And I mean, there are basic two, which is activated carbon and ozonation. All others are less efficient, at least until now. I mean, that might also change in the future. And as said, I'm just wanting to focus on the first part, which is basically, or the identification of the pollution stress and the vulnerability, and with a special focus as well on risks that are associated with assessing these two, or not these two, but in general, multiple different aspects that play into how many pharmaceuticals or substances are discharged and how they are received by the water bodies. One example, which is basically classical in Germany, is diclofenac. It's a pharmaceutical that is taken orally or topical, which means on the skin. It's ecotoxic. We have mesocosm studies that state that the EQS, the environmental quality standard, should be 0.04 micrograms per liter. And that is also put into the environmental quality standard directive proposal. And we have measurement studies in Germany that found out that the PNEC of 0.05 micrograms per liter was exceeded at around 75% of the measuring stations. So we know that we have pharmaceuticals in our water bodies that shouldn't be in there. And we know that the environmental quality standard is exceeded. And one really tough question now arises is, if you talk about risks, how often are you allowed to exceed that, and so on and so on. We also do know that in Germany, rivers are not always rivers. So what I'm presenting here is basically a map of Germany with the rivers, and the rivers have different colors. And it basically shows the share of wastewater discharge of the river. So if the river is green, it means the share of wastewater in the river is between 0 and 10%. If it's yellow, it's between 10 and 20%. Orange is between 20 and 30%, and light red is 30 and 50%. Deep red is 5 to 100%. So we know that we have several rivers where the share of wastewater during mean low water conditions is above 50%. We have some measuring stations where it's higher than 90%. So almost all the river is treated wastewater. And that, of course, also influences on how important a quaternary treatment will be. That also influences the selection process, because that, of course, is a really key criteria for selecting plants. And I've just posted it here again for the different river basins and systems in Germany. You can see that it's not just a single case, but almost in every river you have these spots where the river is more wastewater than natural river water. And we also have this time effect. It's basically here an example for the River Rhine, where under medium conditions, basically always looks good. I mean, you have some points where the share of wastewater is between 20 and 30%, but that really deteriorates during mean low water conditions, where you can see that almost a lot of stations have at least 20 to 30%. So that is quite important to consider if you make a risk assessment, that dilution cannot be based on mean values. You have to basically take into consideration the mean low water conditions and what's also coming from upstream. So those are really, really difficult assessments you have to take. The next slide basically just goes into the efficiency criteria, where we have cost functions for a quaternary treatment that we also presented in the scientific opinion paper the German Environment Agency wrote on the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive recast, which also shows that the bigger the plants, the wastewater treatment plants get, the cheaper it is per capita. And if you want to know more about how to derive those curves, I can just recommend to read the paper on it, which basically has a really deep methodical approach. I mean, the data certainly has some years now, and due to the rising energy prices, it might be a bit more expensive now, but nevertheless, I think it's quite a good way. This already brings me to the summary and to the conclusion, and hopefully to a good discussion, where we state that the quaternary treatment is mandatory to reduce micropollutant loads, and we need it as a multi-barrier concept. And with respect to efficiency, it's certainly quite hard to define if you have to look at several different aspects. You for sure need a good multi-criteria analysis, you need scenarios, you need modeling, you have to combine them in measurements to be precise. And there are a lot of really high uncertainties with respect to risks. And we rather see a risk-based approach as a really complex tool. And we are happy that there are plans that should introduce a wastewater treatment, quaternary treatment step without having to do a risk-based assessment. And last but not least, I want to give a quick commercial break to the scientific opinion paper that I've also already mentioned. We wrote it and it discusses just more aspects of the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive in detail. And if you have any remarks or regards, you're invited to contact me. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Nathan, for your presentation, for your concerns. I'm sure that your concerns are the concerns of the major countries of Europe, like in Portugal. You are in the Mediterranean countries, so you have this dominated effluent flow in our books. Thank you very much. I will pass the word finally to Anabela Rebelo from the Portuguese Environmental Agency that will speak about this assessment approach, risk-based approach. Thank you, Anabela. Please have the word.
Hello?
Okay.
Okay. Are you seeing my presentation in
yes.
in share mode? Okay. So
put in
not in share mode, not in share mode yet.
Yes. Slow. Okay. Show slide.
Because I've seen it. Okay. Let me check here. No, I cannot put it in.
Slideshow.
No, it's not opening, so I will do it in a different way. Just a second.
Okay.
No, I cannot. Let me check if I can do it this way. No, it's not working. Sorry. It's not working, and now I'm not saying anything else.
Anyway, well, even without slideshow, you can see the points. I think you can read the slides.
I will try to share it again to see if it's easier. Let me just put it in this way, and then I will share it like this. It is okay now?
Yes.
Okay.
Fine.
So sorry for this slight delay, but these technologies. Okay, so I will speak a little bit about risk assessment and management and the approach that we have in Portugal. So yes, indeed, member states are equal but different, and sometimes we have to look at some of our differences and to go deeper into to understand indeed this concept. So when talking about the emission limit value assessment, when we focus quite on the performance of treatment plants, and if we're talking about only on treatment, we will look only on technology and the best available techniques and the best that the performance of a treatment can give us. But when we look at the pollutants in the environment, and as Nathan showed, indeed, for example, for diclofenac, the concentration effect with the concentration with no effect was even higher than the proposed environmental quality standard. So we have to look how substances move on the water bodies. We have to take into account the status of water body, the uses of water body, the characteristics of water body, because a river is different from a coastal area, and even in coastal areas, Mediterranean Sea, Baltic Sea is different from Atlantic Ocean, and the last but not the least, the pollutants fate. So when we try to find out the best emission limit value, basically we have to do a dual approach from WFD to Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive, and from Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive to WFD. For example, this approach in the, because you are seeing my second slide, right?
No, just the first.
Okay, so this is not working.
Now you are, okay.
Are you seeing my second slide?
I'm not sure it's the second, but I'm seeing another.
No, it's not the second one. Something is wrong. Something is wrong with my presentation. I'm truly sorry. I will share it again because it's not working. I will see if it's now, because this is my, no, not yet. No, not yet. You are seeing a slide that says, the second that says emission limit value assessment.
Yes, exactly. The
Yes,
second.
not in
If
But if it works like that,
Yes.
please advance.
No,
Please
it's not
advance.
working. It's not working, sorry. It's indeed not working. I don't know what's happening. No. And now I close my presentation. Webinar. I will share it again. I will try to do this way. So this one. Compartilhar.
You are seeing the first one. Try to get the second one.
Okay.
Yes, yes. Okay. Please stay that way, because you see, even without the slides.
Sorry, something is wrong. So when I was talking, that's what I was going to see was, when we're looking at this slide, indeed, if we want to find the real emission limit value as the emission limit value, it's in the range between Water Framework Directive and the directives that establish emission limit values, flat values, like the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive or the Industrial Emissions Directive. So the Portuguese approach, we develop a few, so we already have in place an approach for when we're designing new plants, or when we need to revise permits, or even for retrofitting of plants. So we apply this to find if we really need nitrogen or phosphorus removal, if we need it for E. coli removal, or even for other pollutants removal. And our question is there a need of the revision of the emission limit value defined on the permit, or is there a need to define an emission limit value different from the one that is developed on the directives? Namely, for example, for Industrial Emissions Directive, sometimes we have to go, and we already noticed that sometimes we have to go a little bit deeper than the associated emission limit values. So what is taken into account? So it's an assessment perimeter by perimeter. And if we're talking about a reassessment, we were going to look at the permit and all the data that we have from self-monitoring data, and even of the data that we have from the water bodies. And we are going to look at the receiving water bodies and the critical parameters for its status, its uses, and indeed the classification of that areas in terms of protected areas under WFD. So basically, we use a conceptual tier approach. So it's not modeling that we use just conceptual models. Basically, we look at the hazards, which is the pollutants that maybe are in the wastewaters, and then we're going to look at the vulnerability of the receiving water bodies, well, the susceptibility to the water bodies to pollution, and finally the damage. Well, and if I have that damage and susceptibility to pollution, I have the consequence. The consequence versus arson, I have a risk. So basically, I use this kind of methodology to define appropriated emission limit values, measures for self-monitoring program, and also for compliance assessment. And on the self-monitoring, it may include water bodies monitoring. So how do we start it? We started to do a first classification according the range of the capacity of the treatment plants based on population load, and looking also at the same time water body status, uses of water bodies, and the also the sensitivity to water bodies, to eutrophication, or even vulnerable areas to nitrate pollution, or even if there is already an indication of a water body being at eutrophication risk, but was not yet designated as sensitive. For example, because it had no discharge in that water body, was no discharge yet prior to in that water body. So basically, we always perform the risk assessment when the factor is higher than 1. In all other situations, we perform the risk assessment. How do we start it? We started with the hazards, and with the hazards, we will use proposed emission limit values as input data. So, for example, for nitrogen and phosphorus, we use the emission limit values from the current urban wastewater treatment directive, and also from national law. For example, for the discharges in dams or fresh waters that feed dams. So in that case, we will have a classification from 1 to 9. 1 to 9 is a scale importance. So 1 is minor importance, 9 is absolute importance. And basically, we also take into account, once again, to establish nitrogen and phosphorus, or phosphorus, not only the status, but once again, the vulnerability to pollution, to nitrates, and the status if it's good or less than good due to nitrogen and or phosphorus. So then another type of parameter is the Escherichia coli. Why? We have a lot of bathing waters, but we also have a lot of shellfish waters. We are large producers of clams. So we have this classification under criterion C, under the directive. When we have, in this case is always a case by case and according member state rules. So we define it Escherichia coli, the emission limit values based on this approach. We may also use for other pollutants. And here I'm showing you, so this is a very restricted, there's an error in this table. Now I've seen it. It's not E. coli, it's chemical, compounds of emergent concern, disinfection byproducts or others. And we have this approach where we started to use it for water reuse projects. And mainly this is a very restrictive table. And we mainly use it to understand if we need to go deeper in this kind of substances for water reuse projects. Sorry?
No.
No? Okay. So basically what we're talking about here, if we're going to propose an emission limit value based on this table, we are always talking about, for example, emission limit value of 30 times versus the limit of quantification, which is quite low, or even equal to environmental quality standard, which is quite low. For example, diclofenac for 0.4 micrograms, it's quite low and very difficult to achieve. So basically, we use this table, like I said, to define measures for water reuse, and to find out if indeed these kind of substances are a risk or not for our water reuse project. So we may define a new table, and once again, a new table based, for example, on percentage of reduction. So we will look into, we will use the assessment based on the water body and the performance of the treatment plants, the capacity of performance. So at the lower level, we could use, for example, the 80% removal as proposed in the recast, and the higher risk level, for example, the no removal rate. So after I have the hazards, I will need to look at the vulnerability of the water receptor to pollution. So I don't like it to call it vulnerability, because vulnerability is more linked to nitrates directive. So in terms of legal aspects, could be only linked to nitrates, but indeed is the susceptibility of the water bodies to pollution. So once again, we are going to look at water reuse information that we already have. So there's a matrix that was developed in a standard ISO 16075 part 1 that allows me to understand indeed the risks, the vulnerability of water pollution, of water bodies, groundwaters and surface waters, and also groundwaters and surface waters in a cumulative way to water pollution. So basically, sometimes we have streams streams or rivers that may have natural inflow points for groundwaters. And in this case, this kind of assessment allows me to understand the cumulative effects, or in another way, allows me also to understand only when I have discharge into surface water, like, for example, a discharge into a coastal area. So after vulnerability, I go to the damage. And the damage basically usually is severity versus the pressure versus likelihood. So in this case, I have a continuous discharge. So I will not look at the temporal dimension, but I will look at the pressure of my treatment plant into the water body, facing the rest of other pollution sources into the same water body. So basically, for the severity, I will look at the status, uses, and classification. Sensitive, nitrates pollution, risk to eutrophication, so some kind of risk of infiltration to groundwater. So I will look at the characteristics of the water body. From the pressure load, I will look at the maximum load that I have discharged into my water body versus the discharge of my treatment plant. So here, ideally, we would like to have this pollution mass load in terms of micropollutants. However, like Nathan said, currently there's a limited data on that. So we basically use the same measure as the directive, which is load in terms of equivalent population. And based on this kind of pressure versus severity, we put it on a matrix and we have a damage. After damage, so I have hazard, I have vulnerability, I have damage, I have a risk. So normalized to the maximum scale level of my importance scale, 9, and I will have 3 levels of risk. So it's a very simple conceptual model, but that can integrate complex data, okay? So basically, if it's high, I need to do a reassessment and decrease my emission limit value. If it's moderated, I need to get a deepen look. I need to understand, do I need to go deepen on the emission limit value? Or for example, I'm not in a river where the mixture with wastewaters is not so high as or the dilution is not due to only to other wastewaters, but I am in a coastal water. So I may look into more detail and based on this define to reassess for the lower emission limit value, or to reassess to define more critical measures for risk management. Like, for example, monitoring, for example, specific criteria for seasonality, or even to define in a severe weather conditions, like, for example, severe drought conditions. So I can look at that into more detail. But if I'm at a low risk, my hazard, my level of my input for hazard is a good emission limit value, and so it could be accepted without no more restricted measures. So how do we use it? We use it for new plants before design, ideally, or before retrofitting planning project. We use also to find out if we need to reassess the permit and reassess the emission limit values that are included in that permit. So basically, we use this methodology to define best emission limit values and additional measures, like, for example, more restrictive monitoring of water bodies, or even seasonal criteria. So, and as a data source, we may use data from river basin management plans, permitting process, but we can also use other data sources, like, for example, the EPRTR, or even research studies. Research studies are very useful, for example, to have information on micropollutants. So we try to use as much as possible the majority of data that we have. And let's see an example. So let's look at an agglomeration. Hey, capacity load 51,000 population equivalent. I have a treatment plant with a in the same range, but with a higher capacity load treatment. It's a secondary plus UV disinfection. In terms of the water body is classified as sensitive, criterion C, due to the shellfish production sites. So, and the status of the Water Framework Directive, the status of the water body according to WFD is good status. So I will look at the annual load of the treatment plant versus the total mass load of the water body. And based on that, I will calculate my pressure mass load. And I can see it, you can see it here on the table, is only 3.2%. I will not only look at that, I will also look at other aspects. Like, for example, like I said, the vulnerability of the groundwaters and also the status. And I will take all that into account according to the previous criteria that I show you. And based on that, I will calculate, and I will use as input data the two possible approaches. So using the more restricted table that we are now using for water reuse projects, and our possible proposal for the minimum percentage of reduction. And in that way, I will see if I'm going to look into a more restrictive approach. I will have a risk assessment moderate 3.1, and in that case, I can apply to a single substance, and I can apply, so I can do a reassessment to define a more restrictive emission limit value, and the reassessment to result a risk low. It would be needed just to define an emission limit value a little bit above limit of detection, but below the limit of quantification. So this could be really, really very complex. But if I apply the second approach in terms of percentage of reduction, and for example, for the group of 6 substances as previewed on the recast, I can with the 50% removal rate, I can achieve a very low risk level. So what this means, indeed, the main constraints are the receiving water body characteristics and the overall discharge load. So basically, we have to take into account not only the capacity of treatment of the plant, but indeed try to really understand what are the characteristics of the water body. So when we look at the current recast versus this our risk assessment approach, we notice that indeed both approaches are defined to for the compliance and the achievement of environmental goals. The Urban Waste Opportunity Directive established links between several directives. Our risk assessment goes a little bit deeper and also establish links with other directives, like, for example, the industrial emissions directives due to the overall of the pressure mass load. These the emission limit directives, the emission limit value definition, in terms of the current recast is based on a flat criteria with easy compliance and assessment checking. So our risk assessment approach is also so ensures also this way to easily define and easily cross-check the compliance, but goes into a little bit deepen with the integration of all the information that we know, namely from the compliance of other directives like the WFD, but it keeps the same easily checking compliance, and it's easy to use with easy inputs and outputs. So the approach allows to include a cost-benefit assessment. In terms of the recast, we think it's a little bit blind, but because it's always based on the performance. But if you go to performance and the population load, however, allow us to a little bit go ongoing process. So since it can be applied to every revision of permits and can also be applied on ongoing process based on the monitoring data that we have, the self-monitoring data versus the monitoring data that we have for the compliance of the WFD. Both approaches allows the optimization and efforts and resources. Namely, for example, the recast is very focused on the carbon neutrality, which is very welcome. Our risk assessment allow us to allocate efforts, namely in terms of energy consumption and chemicals chemicals reduction, to putting indeed treatment where and when it's necessary. So for that range, for example, that range between 10,000 and 100,000, it could be a very easy process, but very with robust results, since it's based on real robust results. So it's a multi-criteria analysis tool for the assessment of risks caused by urban wastewater discharges for the environment, and so allows the risk assessment for environment and human health. Use easy and known inputs as inputs of the model. So the hazards are the proposed emission limit values, and based on that we can reassess and define the best ones. So used and the other input data result from the river basin management plan and monitoring requirements under the several European directives, takes into account the characteristics of water body, its susceptibility to pollution, the current status, uses, characteristics, namely the capacity of dilution of the natural dilution capacity and mixture of the water body, so the hydrodynamics of the water body, because it's not we like I said, rivers and streams and coastal waters are different, and so different not a different approach, but should be seen, the differences should be taken into account, and because if we go to the most critical condition, and if we consider ocean equal to a stream, it could be very restrictive, it could be very costly. And this approach can be applied to any range of population. Indeed, it can be applied. And we basically, with our position paper, we intended to show you the outcomes and the possibilities and the major advantages of using methodologies that allow us to measure benefits and less benefit effects from when we select the solution. Because indeed, like I think the presentation from Geneva was very obvious. Indeed, the first outcomes of the project shown that when we look only on the performance, and we forget a little bit the water status, sometimes we may not look at the overall picture, and the best results may not be achieved. So thank you very much for your attention. Hello? Did you hear my presentation?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So I was mute. So just to say that with Annabella presentation, we are concluding this first part of the workshop. Annabella is very well known in Portugal, is PhD in chemistry, and is a senior officer in the Portuguese Environmental Agency. But before passing to the questions and answers and comments, I would like to give the word to Nel Frederick Rosenstock from the European Commission for a couple of words, and afterwards to Thelma. Please, Nel, have the word.
Thank you. I'm really happy that I listened here, and that I could also attend this workshop, and that we have this discussion among experts, because of course the negotiations on the recast that we've proposed in autumn last year are now going forward really quickly, and it is really, really good, I think, to understand each other, because I think some of these words we use easily, and then we realize after a while that we might not have actually understood each other in the same way. And that's the beauty of the EU. In the end, we all try to speak the same language, but sometimes we might miss some nuances. And I asked if I could maybe just without slides, very simply explain how we see the risk-based approach implemented or proposed in the recast Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive, and what we did to ensure that, as Annabella so beautiful said, the goal is really the Water Framework Directive, the good ecological and chemical status. I think that's that we all agree. We also have, of course, by now the Marine Strategy Framework Directive. I think that is a directive we should not forget. I didn't see it so much today, but it is very important. It is a bit younger, only from 2008. But yeah, let me quickly say a quick word about our proposal. So the entire legal proposal is contains a lot of references to the risk-based approach, but I know that this is not exactly what has been presented by Annabella, and it's a bit different. So our proposal is, of course, for the entire EU, so it has to be a simple text that can be applied across 27 very diverse member states. And as very well said in the beginning, in the opening, there is no one size fits all, really. But still, as the European Commission, we are obliged to find a way forward and propose something that would make most sense to fit all. And so that's what we did really with our proposal. We recasted a 30-year-old directive that has really delivered well in improving our water bodies that we've seen across the member states, and that has really well worked because it is a very simple directive. It is very straightforward. It has also received a lot of EU funding to be implemented across the EU, and that has worked. During the impact assessment work and the evaluation, which I was both involved in, we paid a lot of attention to understand how this directive has, first of all, contributed to achieving the Water Framework Directive's objectives and the Marine Strategy Framework Directives, the Drinking Water Directive's objectives, the Bathing Water Directive's objectives, all the beautiful EU water legislations that we have, and to make sure that we continue to contribute to that in a cost-efficient way where the benefits definitely outweigh the costs. And I saw that here the focus was really on Article 7 and 8, where we propose a more systematic approach to, in Article 7, on nutrient removal, first of all, for those treatment plants above 100,000 PE, with a more clear designation of sensitive areas. And as Nathan said also very nicely, is that the big treatment plants are simply also the biggest emitters, and thus in most cases, the bigger problem. And it's also most efficient then to enforce action here. And so first of all, as regards to the sensitive areas, we've really seen from the implementation of the current directive, that this has not been done in a consistent manner across the member states. So here we see sometimes areas that are designated by one member state as sensitive, but not by the other, but both are discharging into the same area. So there is something not yet working well in the way risk or sensitivity of these water bodies are understood. So this is something that we tried to address by proposing a systematic approach, first of all, on how to designate sensitive areas. We set a list in Annex 2, and also to say, let's take systematic action at the level of the biggest emitters, those treatment plants above 100,000 PE. That's one step. Then I had very interesting presentations on that as well today. We go really a step further by addressing micropollutants. This is really new. Some of this has already been done either to reach the objectives of the Water Framework Directive or in more systematic manners, as we've heard from Nathan, but not yet really across the entire EU. And we did a lot of studies and a lot of effort to understand how to do this in the correct way, to on the one hand protect our environment, but also to propose something that is really cost efficient, because we understand resources are limited, and that we are very much aware of that. And so also with these cost curves that Nathan has shown, we see simply that the largest treatment plants, there it is most cost efficient to take action. That doesn't mean that we do not pay attention to the Water Framework Directive. We do see by now that we find micropollutants, and Annabella mentioned diclofenac, in almost all of our water bodies. Our water bodies often consist of a large share of urban wastewater. So it is important to take systematic action. And that's then also reflected again in Article 8 when it comes to smaller treatment plants below 100,000 PE, where we say, yes, please use the risk-based approach as we suggested, by looking into whether we achieve that we have good bathing waters, good and healthy drinking water sources, whether we achieve the Water Framework Directive, the Marine Strategy Framework Directive, and all that, because we depend so much on our waters. And of course, we were so much aware of the cost that we thought about how to cover these costs in advance. And we really want to implement here the polluter pays principle, with having proposed the extended producer responsibility, where those industries polluting most, namely the cosmetics and the pharma industry, would be charged with the cost for the full cost of the fourth treatment. And therefore, we also think that it makes sense to have a sort of security net that we know the largest images, those above 100,000 PE, systematically take action, because then we have planning security for the member states, but also for the industry. So it simply makes sense to move ahead here. And then for below, we need to set minimum requirements to ensure that across the EU, we achieve the same level of protection of our water bodies. So to summarize, it's really, the entire proposal is based on this risk-based thinking, taking into account our different EU water legislation. It is based on a lot of expert discussions, and I see in this workshop a lot of expert names that have also followed the impact assessment process. So it's really nice to see. The idea of the proposal is really, it's an EU proposal. It is the idea of protecting our also transboundary waters. It is reflecting that since 1991, we not only have also the Water Framework Directive, but also the Marine Strategy Framework Directive. So we need to look a bit broader. We took very seriously the cost efficiency approach. And just a last word on Annabella's last point about the trade-offs between enhanced, for example, fourth treatment, which comes with more energy use. That's why we need to also go in the direction of energy neutrality. We need to send a signal to the market that this sector is going to be modernized, it is going to protect the environment even further. And at the same time, the technologies have to be developed so that we can do so in an energy efficient way and really ensure that our water bodies are safe for the future. So I hope that is clear. And then of course we have Article 18, which protects everything that is not protected by Article 3 to 8. Thank you for letting me say this, and I'm happy to also take any questions if there are any to us, but I think we had very good speakers. They probably get many more questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Nell Rosenstock. I will pass the word immediately to Thelma Prank for after some minutes to get to the important part of this section. It is the questions, the comments, and the clarifications, the answers. Okay, Thelma, please have the word.
Thank you, Professor. Just a quick check to see if you hear me well.
Yes.
Perfect.
Fine.
Thank you very much. I will just start by thanking quickly the Portuguese Environment Agency and the Water Resources Department for taking the initiative of organizing this webinar, I'm sorry, and for all the speakers from Italy and Germany for agreeing to joining us today. And thank you also for all the participants for your interest and high interest on the topic. Just to frame this a little bit, this initiative, we found important to organize this webinar in the context of the request of the Urban Wastewater Directive, as throughout the discussion, and as Neil also mentioned just now, we have been hearing a lot of interest and a lot of member states referring to this concept of risk assessment and management. It has been a topic of interest by several member states and some other stakeholders as well. And we found that it would be useful to organize this technical meeting to present our views on it and to also provide the opportunity at expert level to exchange some ideas on the topic. We have circulated a position paper on this matter, presenting some concrete proposals on Article 18 and explaining our rationale behind these proposals. That's actually the basis for the workshop organized today. I would invite the participants, if you have not received it, we will be happy to share it with you. And we hope once again that the webinar has been useful in order to further explain the concept and actually to put into evidence that our proposals can be based on ongoing work already undertaken, for example, under the Impel network, so a network of European practitioners, as our colleague from Italy showed today. Like Annabella mentioned in the end, we believe to be proposing a methodology that is equally as simple and verifiable, but also versatile to the approach presented by the Commission, and actually builds on the proposal of the Commission. It reinforces this approach. We're not changing anything from scratch here in the proposal, but actually building on this risk assessment approach that the Commission already initially presented. Once again, just to very simply summarize it, that our environmental protection goals are shared by us. It's just a matter of really putting and placing the efforts where they are mostly needed. I will conclude, but just saying that we of course understand the goal of our Spanish colleagues of the Spanish presidency to reach a general agreement on this proposal in October, ideally. Also, we are aware also of the Parliament, the European Parliament's calendar that is quite in line with this objective. We hope that this webinar is contributes to shed more light on the concept and can be a constructive contribution to the negotiation. And I would just invite the colleagues attending it, if it's not the case, if you're not expert directly involved in the negotiation of the directive, to reach out and to articulate you with your experts following this matter, and also with your permanent representations. And for all other stakeholders attending, we remain, of course, available to any questions and additional comments that you might have. And of course, here, from my part here in Brussels, I'll be happy to put you in contact with our experts in Portugal if you have any interest in further questions. We would, of course, be very interested in receiving your feedback and to receive any signalation of further interest in exploring this avenue in the context of the request, the revision. So I will not take any much more of the useful time for Q&A, and I will give back the floor to Professor Saldanha Matos. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Thelma. The time is running fast. It's not the first time I see this film, and not a long time for discussion, but we'll have at least half an hour if you want to profit that time. For those who want to intervene with questions or just comments to the presenters, please write end in the chat. For better control. And if possible, I will ask the help of Felizmina Quadrado for the environmental protection, for the Portuguese Environmental Agency, for manage this section in proper order with me. So the questions and answer part of this workshop is open. And so who wants to be the first? I'm sure that the presentation were very clear, and also the words of Nel and of Thelma were also very clear.
We have a first hand.
Okay, I think you have one.
Yeah, that was me. I have actually a question towards Annabella. Which deals with the calculation of the damages, because that's also a topic that is quite relevant for us, because we see that it is both sides, basically, where you have that long-term damage and where you have a very short damage, where in very short periods of time you basically can destroy a whole ecosystem, and how that is or if you include that somehow in your risk assessment. Thanks.
Annabelle?
Okay, so Nathan, that's a very interesting question. Indeed, that was one of the most outcomes from the presentation from Geneva. Indeed, acute effects by not taking into account emission limit values that do not take into account the quantitative aspects of the acute effects. So basically on the damage, we are going to integrate several aspects. So it's a tier approach, like I've told you. So we're going to look at status, and we are going to look at uses, and we are going to look at classification of the water body. And based on that, since it's a worst case approach, and also take into account the mass, the pressure of the mass load, we will look what kind of pressures do we have on our water body. So basically, we will try to understand if indeed we may have high concentrations on the emission limit values that may provoke problems of acute effect. So whenever necessary, whenever justified, we just do some kind of reassessment, and if needed, we develop two levels of emission limit values. one in a concentration, milligrams per liter, so the maximum doses that you may receive at once, and another like a medium in terms of mass per day or mass per week, usually mass per day. So basically, this is how we try to integrate into the permits both of the values. I hope I understand. I reply to your answer, but it's always so. We are not going to modeling. We are just going to try to find out indeed what is the best, taking into account the data that we have. How can we prevent if we have risks for acute effects? And in that case, we develop 2 levels of emission limit values in the same permit.
Okay, thank you. More questions?
May I add something?
Of course, of course.
Okay, just to say that in Italian legislation, when we write the permit for the industrial installations subject to the ID, for example, there are cases of emission limit values expressed in milligrams per liter, of course, as concentration, but also as mass load. So sometimes you have also mass load per day or per year. Per day is usual. But even if we have got this different emission limit values, I have to admit that unfortunately we are not very skilled. So sometimes it happens that we do not look at the water body. That was the main thing that Annabella also said before, and also Nathan before. So sometimes we don't remember about the quality of the river because of the river management plan is not upgraded, it's not the new one, it's the old one. So it's both aspects that you have to consider, so quality and quantity, and also the mean limit values, but also the quality of the river. So we are good for the emission limit values, but not so very good for the water quality. But we have to improve now, and we are going to do this under this also for the new revision. There is also the revision of the Industrial Emission Directive too. So that's the main goal.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I would say also that, as Annabella told, I think that we are all equal and all different. All equal in terms of objectives, goals, challenges. The challenges that NATAM has spoken in Germany are very common in other parts of Europe, and I think that you are all joined with this in the society in terms of achieving all these goals and all these objectives. But of course, that in fact you have different receiving waters, as Genève has told, and as a researcher, I would expect that this risk-based assessment will be applied to all the range of served population in the treatment plants. I would, as a researcher, for the ones looking to the directive, looking to the different requirements that you would expect. But of course, there are other variables, and you have just to listen also the position of the DG, and of course this aspect and other aspects deserve a lot of discussion. But one thing that is very, very important is that the goals and the objectives are the same for all Europe, for all the water bodies in Europe. Okay, thanks. I think that you have another.
Yes.
Andri Kakoniti, please have the word.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Andri Kakoniti from Water and Development Department of Cyprus. Congratulations for this great organization of this interesting webinar. And I would like to know whether you have extend this risk assessment taking into considerations cases where we actually use wastewater for irrigation, This is the case we have in Cyprus. We actually use all the quantity of the water for irrigation. And I don't know if you studied this, what is the risk for a water body if we irrigate crops in a catchment area of this water body?
Okay, thank you. Probably it's for Annabella, the question. For Annabella and for Genève.
So I can reply for Portugal. And so we consider, and when we're talking about hazard for nitrogen or phosphorus, so we basically depending, so if we have a very high risk for water body, we should consider to have some nitrogen and or phosphorus removal. But at the same time, we need to understand how is the amount that could be uptaken by crops in terms of irrigation. So basically, the final emission limit value for discharge into the water body should be managed, should be assessed according to risk assessment, plus the integration of the calculation of the amount of nitrogen or phosphorus that it's going to be uptaken by crops. That will depend on the type of crops and the several proposals. ISO now is in the final process to develop a standard, so it will be published, I'm quite sure, in the next months, that specifies how to calculate this kind of nitrogen and or phosphorus amounts for irrigation. So basically, this is how we do for discharges. If we're talking about just to calculate to assess the risk, evaluate the risk for water reuse projects, yes, we developed, we have a specific methodology for risk assessment approach for water resources that will take into account the uptaken by the crop and also the risks for groundwaters, namely for groundwaters and for risks for surface runoff in case of areas where with a low infiltration rate. So basically, we take into account the metrics for vulnerability that I show it.
Okay. Genève, you want to add something? Some words?
I cannot add more than Annabella already said. But Italy is going as well to introduce this risk assessment approach also for the water use for irrigation. You have to note that in Italy we have got a legislation that is dated, is a 20 years old legislation. So now entering the new regulation 2020 7.1, we are obliged to upgrade this legislation, but the legislation was already fixing some values, and now we are performing the risk assessment approach for define the right values for the water use for irrigation, and not only for irrigation, but also for water use for urban and civil and environmental purposes.
Okay, thank you. In fact, if you speak about Cyprus or Malta, the percentage of wastewater that is reused is very, very, very large compared with other countries like in Portugal. That of course there are a movement in terms of increasing this number, but in fact in Cyprus and Malta is is very, very, very substantial proportion of the wastewater that is used by visible reasons, the climate, and so on and so on. Okay, so more questions from the audience? Any additional comments? I think you have at least 5-10 minutes for potential questions. But if not, I think that you could advance for some short conclusions, a couple of lines for conclusions, and for that I will challenge Lisbina Quadrado from the Environmental Protection Agency to conclude the session, please.
Thank you very much. First of all, I want to thank everybody to come to this workshop, especially to the speakers for the very interesting presentations you have made, also to the Commission that was here with us and share his vision. And it was always very important is to clarify, because this is a very important issue for everyone. And so I'm going to share my, I don't know if you are already seeing.
Okay.
Okay. Well, we must realize that we are now request a 30 years old directive. Many things is different now. We have had a lot the acknowledgement and the water frame and even the marine strategy bring us other view of how environment should be managed, how we must look not only from the waste treatment plant to the receiving waters, but also from the receiving waters for the wastewater treatment plant. So we must know now, we know now that this vision is very, very important, not only here for the urban wastewaters, but even for industrial wastewaters, where we have already this vision implemented in the new directive. Of course, we are totally aligned with the environmental objectives of the directives. Let me tell you that for Portugal, the old directive was very important for improving, for instance, our bathing waters. So we are very, very committed with all these goals. We want to keep it simple. I think it's important to keep it simple. The implementation and also the compliance assessment, but let's do it the best way, because you must achieve that goals. We must be clear, doing the things in a clear way, but let's do it in using the best resources to obtain these goals, and not making like saying I have a certain load, well, I have to do this treatment. And without seeing if I have with that, I could have some other problems that I was not concerning just because I was not looking at all the picture. So when I can look at the synergies between what is my decision to treat the urban wastewaters and the difference among the multiple receiving water bodies, I will be more certain that the objectives I should achieve from the water frame directive and the marine directive, I'm quite sure I'm going to get there with the cost benefits more equilibrated. We see here that the project line show us effectively that when we decided to make this urban waste water treatment discharge in line with the water frame directive, and of course with the marine directive, we have higher transition for circular model when compared with the simple compliance of uniform values, because this methodology will allow us to promote natural values with the consumption of less resources. We see here also, and I appreciate very much the presentation of Nathan. He showed us how the acknowledgement of Germany in considering the quaternary treatment process, and how difficult it is still to have here results that we are expecting to have. Therefore, we have here developed, and Bella is our face, a methodology in order to have here knowing that where we have to achieve, we have to go to achieve the environment objectives. What are the characteristics of the receiving waters? What are the characteristics of my urban wastewaters? And how is the best way to achieve that goals? And we have here to propose a simple, it's simple, the results, but what is behind this methodology, of course, is scientific and technical, already robust and known in the scientific world. but it's now put it in a simple way to use, in a simple way to control by definition, of course, to see if to comply in the assessment. And I'm here using the best information I have from the different directives that we have in place. And so I know that I'm respecting the water body. I am respecting the use, namely water for water consumption, or I think waters where you have more high need for water quality. So I have all in place, and I can see what is going to happen if I take some of the decisions, and not only see as a list. I said, well, if I have this load, I have to do this, and no care what will be the real effect of the water. I think what we had in the past, it was the acknowledgement of 30 years ago. We have, of course, a more simple way to do it. We were in a different level of water management. Now we have, of course, more acknowledgement now, and we must have here doing the way that it already is included in the directives we have, namely Water Frame Directive, Combined Approach, Risk Assessment in the use. We have already developed how to do it, and of course, it was very interesting, these all tools that we have developed. And so what we are expecting is, when we have a robust directive, to use the best knowledge that we have now, and the best way to do things in order to achieve the goals that we want, because every one of us want to live to our children and myself, my grandchildren, a better world, and to have a place to live with a good environment. So this is, I think, the main aspects. I understand that this way of doing things could look somehow difficult or less technical or scientific way to achieve it. But I think what Annabella tried to show you, it's that not so. So there are a lot of studies doing in this area, a lot of examples, practical examples already in place, and the best way to have the results. We have that example in Portugal, because we have a tremendous problem, not with urban wastewater treatment, but with industrial wastewater discharge in the very sensitive water body. And we apply this methodology, and we define the ELV more appropriated, and now we really don't have any problems with the water body, because we demonstrated that sometimes it's how to achieve the goals. We need to look at all the two parts of the problem, not only considering if I'm in the urban wastewater treatment plant, I'm just looking at this, or if I am doing the management, I'm just looking at the water body. No, we must have to look into both sides and see the best way to achieve. We kindly invite you to reach out to our permanent representations and experts following the negotiation if you are interested in supporting or further working on Portuguese proposal on Article 18. I think it's important to use the best tools we have that the science gives us in order to achieve the goals with an equilibrium of costs and benefits, knowing that the environment objectives are, of course, important and we must achieve them. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Felizmina. I think that that you can stop sharing. Okay. Thank you very much. I would also congratulate all the participants by this section, and to wish you a nice weekend. I'm completely sure that the discussions will continue, and the progress on these fields will continue also. And with that words, I will say bye-bye, and of course, hope a very good work for the future. Thank you very much, and once more, congratulations to the Environmental Protection Agency. Okay.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you
Bye-bye.
very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Have a nice weekend.
Bye.
Nice weekend.